All right, good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're joining us. My name is Rebecca Thistlethwaite, and I am the director of the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network. We're a program that is housed at Oregon State University, but we serve a national audience of niche and small-scale meat processors and producers from around the country. We're thrilled to have everybody join us today. Today is kind of a longer format webinar because we have a lot of content to cover. So we're going to keep you all here for about an hour and a half. We are going to try to hold questions till the end because there's a lot of slides to get through and a lot of content. So if you have a burning question, write it down or you can pop it in the chat and I will make sure we get through those at the end. So today we have Evan Driscoll and Grace Dubler of Good Roots. Good Roots is an expert farm and food business consulting firm that works with hundreds of farm and food businesses around the country, including several dozen meat processors. And we've been working with them for close to a decade now on providing not only content for our educational programs, but also coaching and consulting with many of the clients that we work with. So today we're going to talk about data and how to use it. So there's an old saying that you can't manage what you don't measure. And I know that a lot of you guys are collecting data on your financial performance, your operational performance, your labor. But how you use that data to manage your business is really the key question. So I'm going to stop sharing and let Evan and Grace take over.
Great. Thanks so much. Grace, do you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Yep, got it. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, can you put it in showing your whole browser? Is it possible to show the just the
I did that so I could have my notes up on the side. Is that okay?
um
Or I
The
can.
clicker would be better.
yeah, full screen would be better. And I can, if it's helpful, Grace, I can pull it up on my end because I can go into full screen and I'll have my other monitor.
I can pull it up.
Cool. Alrighty, here we go. Stop guessing and start measuring how small meat processors use metrics to create profit. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for being here. Thanks, Rebecca, for the introduction and for setting this all up. And thank you to NMPAN for making this whole project happen. And really excited to share some of the outcomes of this work with y'all and see how it might help make your own key performance indicators more useful, more relevant, and ultimately drive more profit. But before we jump into it, we are Good Roots. My name is Evan Driscoll. I'm a senior business consultant with Good Roots. I've been with Good Roots since 2025, so 5 years. We work with farms, ranches, and supply chain businesses, including meat processors. We also work with co-packers, manufacturers, distributors, food hubs, all sorts of folks. But in working with NMPAN over the years, we've really been able to go deep with a number of meat processors and the small to mid-scale meat processing sector generally, and have really seen kind of the belly of the beast, working with a bunch of different processors. Grace, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Grace Dubler. I'm a business consultant here at Good Roots. I've been here about 2.5 years, and I'm in Northern California.
Cool. And at Good Roots, we do have three particular areas that we work in. So we have accounting services. So we do like bookkeeping, and actively do accounting for our clients. We do business consulting, which is what Grace and I do, which is oftentimes we're looking at the outcomes of the accounting of the financials of the data that's coming out of there and use that data to make better decisions in the business. And then we also have a marketing pillar too. So how to drive more sales, how to create increase your marketing presence, things of that nature. So those are the three main areas that we work in. And this is us. That's all the happy faces, including one very cute baby in there too. All right. Our agenda today. So we're going to do an overview of key performance indicators, and our the paper that we've developed with NMPAN. We're going to talk about just the high level what KPI are, why they matter. We're going to talk about the types of KPI for meat processors generally that we've seen, and the bulk of this is going to be the case study on KPI. So we have three real meat processors that we've worked with here, and we're going to look specifically at those meat processors and the KPI that they use to drive their own profitability. And then we'll be talking about developing your own KPI and the process by which you might go about doing that. So let's keep going. So the image on the right there, the importance of key performance indicators for meat processors, 3 case studies. That is what all of this presentation is coming from today. It is on the NPAN website, and we'll make sure to have a link to it. There's also a link at the end of this presentation where you can go ahead and download it. It is a serious deep dive on 3 particular meat processors that are currently profitable, and the KPI that they use to manage their business on a daily, weekly, monthly, and annual basis. So that was really the goal. We wanted to identify, three of these meat processors, go deep on it with them. The reason we're doing this is because we did a cohort a number of years ago with NPAN, and we did try to do some benchmarking and key metric analysis or KPI analysis with folks, and we just had a tough time doing it. And one of the reasons is because every meat processor is different. I mean, we're all kind of the same, but we're all kind of a lot different too. And so it was like comparing apples to oranges to pears to peaches a lot of times. There were some things that we could see, just like total revenue, total net profit, things of that nature. But like the real granular details behind it, what's actually driving the profit or loss of any given business was very hard to see. So this paper kind of came out of that. Well, if it's hard for us to measure apples to apples here, let's go deep on real existing processors. What KPI are they using, and what kind of examples can we pull from that that may or may not be applicable to your business, right? So we did a number of interviews, qualitative interviews with these folks. Just tell me about your business, what works for you, what doesn't. We also did a full review of their financials as well. We also did a full review of the metrics that they're using. And at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do was the KPI that you're measuring, how does that directly impact your profitability, right? We wanted that direct connection there between these things. So because these KPI are specific to these businesses, like I said, they may or may not be relevant to your business, but the whole intent here is that we're going to go through 9 different KPI across 3 different clients. And the hope is that 1 or 2, maybe 3 of these metrics will apply to your business directly, and you might consider using them. And also just kind of like lighting a fire under folks here to say, this is something that we want to get better at, and we have some tools now to think about this and examples by which, we can build our own KPI and to actually go and do it and to use them and to measure it and to make different decisions in the business as a result of measuring your key metrics, your KPI on an ongoing basis. All right. Why KPIs matter to you as a small processor. KPI is key performance indicators. And all KPIs are they're key numbers that tell you how your business is actually performing, why they matter, right? We can see business trends early. So we want to get in front of these things as much as we can. If we're only reviewing our financials quarterly, annually, whatever it might be, by the time we're looking at those financials, looking at our profit and loss, looking at our balance sheet, if we're looking at it annually, then that year is already gone and we can't control what's going to happen in that year any longer, right? So KPI are meant to be put in place so that we can get an idea, if our head count coming in the door is low right now, or it's going to be low next week, we can get in front of some of those problems and reach out to our customers and clients. We can try to fill our schedules, whatever it might be, ahead of time so that we can mitigate some of the issues that might come up there. We want to make data-driven decisions and not gut decisions, right? If we have good relevant KPI that we're measuring regularly, we can base our decisions off of data, right? So if you're spending a ton of time collecting data, collecting KPI, If you're spending a ton of time looking at your financials and such, right? That's a good thing. But if you're not ultimately making different decisions in the business, then it's a waste of time, ultimately, right? We want to be reviewing the data so that we are making different decisions in the business. We want to identify inefficiencies and set priorities, right? Really what we're doing with KPI is we're setting a target for success. This is what success looks like. And if we don't hit it, then we're not successful. And if we do hit it, we are successful. And we should celebrate that, right? And equally important is the accountability around each one of those KPI too, right? Somebody should own your KPI, right? If it's head per day or head per week or head per month or whatever it is, you need somebody on their team. That might be you as the owner. It might be one of your directors or managers. It might be somebody on the floor, whatever it might be. Somebody has to own it, right? And that sets the priority for them, which then sets the priority for you, right? So defining success and accountability around these things are really important. Working on your business and not just in it, right? A lot of the folks that we work with, particularly owner operators, suffer from what I call operational blindness, which is just you are in the business all the time. You're operating the business all the time. You don't have the time to take your head out, get a breath of fresh air, and see what's going on at the bigger picture level. So KPI, if you don't have KPI that you're managing to, it means you're not managing. Every manager has goals that they're driving for, that their teams are driving for, that the business is driving for, right? So we need that time to work on the business and not just in the business. Ultimately, we want to drive profitability, right? We've worked with a lot of businesses that do a lot of good stuff, right? We like to work with everybody in this room. If you're a small mid-sized meat processor, there's more to your business than just making a profit. We totally understand that, right? This is a critical piece of the food supply chain infrastructure that's not currently being met, and y'all are a big piece of that solution, right? But if you don't have margin, you don't have mission. So the number one thing that kills businesses is a recurring lack of profitability. And if we can set up KPI and metrics so that we can drive profitability, it opens up a world of possibility, right? Notice I said possibility. This is not about greed. It's not about just making money. Profit is it's another way of saying freedom or flexibility. Gives you a lot of options, right? All right, let's keep going. We want to develop KPIs that are effective and efficient, right? So there's a difference between those two things. Efficiency, the way I like to think about that is, are we hitting the target, right? When we shoot at the target, if we're an archer and you're shooting at the target, are we hitting the middle of it? Are we hitting just outside the middle? Are we shooting totally off the target? Whatever, right? Are we hitting the target? Effective is it the right target? We're going to be talking about effectiveness here. Are we shooting at the right target, right? I think a lot of folks tend to focus on efficiency, but pulling back, working on the business, seeing the bigger picture, are we being effective in what we're measuring right now, right? So general KPI structure that we take is, what is the KPI? We're going to talk a lot about that today in just a minute. What are the KPI that you might be measuring, right? 2, how do you measure it? Where does it come from? Is it coming from your accounting system? Is it coming from your software? Is it coming from reports on the floor? You got to know where this data is actually going to come from, right? How are we going to collect it? 3, how frequently do you measure it, right? Usually it's going to be daily, weekly, or monthly metrics. Generally, that's what we see. So establish that on the front end. Again, who owns it? This is probably the most important one. Who owns it? The owner cannot own all of the key metrics, cannot own all of the responsibilities of the business, right? So it's going to be very important to delegate that out, right? If somebody on your team has control of the metric, they should own it, right? And establish that, like be very crystal clear about that too, right? Here's a new metric. We're going to try it out, and now it's yours, right? And make sure that they have buy-in on it, that they understand why we want to do this, all that stuff, but communicate that directly to whoever needs to own it. Number 5, business decisions made out of it. What are the types of decisions we can make if we start tracking X, Y, or Z thing in the business, right? And we'll get some more examples of that as we go deeper into the case studies. Let's keep going. All right, so again, working on the business, not in the business, we want to start by taking 1 to 2 hours a week, if possible, to really focus on this stuff, right? Every Friday morning, we take an hour, or every Monday afternoon, or whatever it is. Like, It's really hard to do that, and it's really hard to do that for the first time in particular, but you got to start somewhere, and you need to open up that 1 or 2 hours a week or whatever to just like, did all the data come in? Where are we at this week? And then, what kind of other, like, how can we mitigate any issues that we see as a result of looking at these things? So make time to do that. And one of the ways you can make time to do that is delegate some operational stuff off your plate to your team so that you can do that, right? So really making the time and space to do this is very important. Wherever you end up landing with your key metrics, with your KPI, just do it consistently. And Rebecca and I were talking right before this call about we don't want to let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? And the reality is like a lot of the KPI are not going to be all inclusive. They're not going to measure everything in your business, right? But like, even if it's not perfect, we want to do it consistently. Being consistent about your metrics is very important. So stay on top of them. And then we're going to use our KPIs to answer key questions about your business, right? Not every business is the same. So just example questions, am I spending too much or too little on labor? Labor is going to come up many times during this conversation today. It's probably your biggest cost, right? Having KPI developed for that is probably a good move. Is my plant operating at full capacity, right? What is full capacity also, right? And so how much room do we have for growth here? Is this revenue stream actually profitable? We're going to talk a little bit about enterprises and how to understand different types of revenue in your business and if that revenue is profitable. How efficient is a new team of butchers? You got a new team of butchers in the house. How are we going to measure if they're hitting the mark or not, right? If we're not segmenting the work that they're doing and measuring that performance, we won't know. It'll all just be kind of, mixed up across all your teams. So these are just a handful of examples. There's 100 questions you could be asking about your business, and you probably already know them. All right, let's keep moving. All right, Grace.
Awesome. Yeah. So we want to focus on three types of KPIs today, because these are what came up with our case studies, and this is what we see time and time again with our clients. There are many other types of KPIs, but the three we want to talk about today are financial KPIs, production KPIs, and labor efficiencies. And we're going to walk through those first, and then we'll get into the case studies. So starting with financial KPIs, I do want to just exit this real quick, if I can, and show our report. Hopefully, many of you have looked at this, read it, studied it, or you're here to learn more. One of the early introductory pages are our financial KPIs, and it has formulas written out. So we want to make sure you know those and you're able to track those in your own financials. And then heading back here, oops, I have to scroll through some slides to get back to our financial piece. So what we have here is an example profit and loss, and we're going to talk about financial KPIs a lot throughout this presentation because one of the key things we wanted to understand was how do the KPIs relate to financial profitability. So just in this example, we're looking at a profit and loss collapsed with considering maybe only one enterprise. We're seeing all product income up top, and then we're seeing a cost of goods sold line. For a processing facility, this is most often direct labor and supplies. The difference between those two things gets us our gross profit, which is a dollar figure. And the relationship between gross profit and total income is gross margin. That's a percent. One of the immediate things that comes up might be, oh, we want to benchmark gross margin across processors. Depending on what's in your cost of goods sold or how you define your enterprise, your gross margin can vary drastically. So that's one of the immediate things that came up in some of our previous benchmarking. And one of the things we'll talk about today a lot is how people are defining their enterprises and how we can use metrics once we know the kind of enterprise framework. So gross profit, gross margin. For Good Roots, we have a structure of how we organize our chart of accounts. That's how we organize the lines in your accounting for your P&L. For us, we put our overhead into four main categories. First up is labor. So we've already put direct labor in this cost of goods sold category. So other labor here is overhead, your scheduling people, your admin, maintenance, cleaning, whatnot. That's sitting down here in the overhead labor account. Later, when we talk about labor to sales ratio, we're going to think about all labor combined, but we need to think about our direct and our overhead. So again, we're already mentioning what some of these inconsistencies we see in how people's P&Ls are set up and how it's difficult to benchmark. And we want to make those really clear in the case studies and how people are measuring. The other overhead accounts, we categorize things into operating. So anything that's not directly supply sitting here in cost of goods sold, we're going to see this as like utilities, supplies, other things it takes to run your business. We're going to see general and admin, that might be your marketing expenses or your professional fees, paying your bookkeeper or your accountant, and fixed. Pretty simple. Usually it's in the name. It's your rent, your mortgage payment, your interest on loans. And as these four categories collapse up to see a total number, we often look at the ratio of the total dollar to our total income. And that's our percent of sales number. And this is something we are often looking at Good Roots because our clients have this set up. Typically, we set them all up this way so we can compare, we can benchmark, but we highlight this to just highlight this is an example of one KPI you might be looking at. All of these expenses come together. Again, we get a ratio of what that is compared to our total sales. And in this case, the difference between our gross profit, which is what we had left over after income and COGS, minus our total expenses, gets us to a negative net operating income. That's a dollar figure. Net operating margin is a percent. So the ratio of dollar net operating to income. So again, all those formulas and more detail there are in the report. But we just wanted to start with like kind of high level financials since that's our bread and butter at Good Roots is kind of making sure we're all really comfortable with looking at our P&L. But we're going to cruise along and we're going to introduce a concept about enterprise accounting, which we
Really
think,
quick,
yeah.
I jump in here. So this is if you look to the left, this is just like an example meat processor profit and loss statement, right? So it's what we are just looking at on the other slide, right? We all know that a lot of meat processors are not just processing meat, right? We need to understand what the enterprises are in our business. We're not going to go super deep on this today, but just wanted to say that this is something that we all need to consider is splitting out your enterprises. What's an enterprise? It's like two different types of businesses, right? So for example, I think a lot of the meat processors we work with they have processing services, of course, right, which is service. And then they might also be selling retail or wholesale meat. That's products. You're selling products, finished meat, right? Two totally different types of businesses with different types of key metrics, with different types of drivers and profitability assumptions, right? So when we look at this one on the left, we can see, okay, we had $616,000 in income and we had a net margin of 3%. Cool. That's what's going on at the aggregated level for this business. You can go to the next slide. If we, in our accounting system, split this stuff out, and I'm sure, Rebecca, you've heard us say this hundreds of times at this point, right? This is super fundamental. Like we can see that processing is making money and retail is not making money. This is absolutely fundamental to really understanding your key metrics, your KPI, right? Now we can know, okay, well, we need to go deeper on retail in particular, right? We need to develop metrics for that so that we can manage that because that's where we need to turn things around. And oftentimes that is actually what we see with meat processors. Processing has a better chance of making money than the retail and finished product sales do. And really having visibility into that's absolutely critical. So just a note on enterprises.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll keep iterating that with each of our case studies just to show how there's a lot of ways your business might be running, but we want to be clear when we're looking at our case studies of what their example is and what we're referencing when we talk about each of their KPIs. So that's our financial piece. Next is production KPIs. These might be more what you're expecting or what you're used to measuring or what you already are measuring. Examples that we're seeing throughout these case studies our number of head processed per week in order to meet your throughput, pounds processed per day in order to measure efficiency, and our yield percentage for cutting quality and customer satisfaction. So those ones we'll touch on a lot as we dive into our case studies. The third piece is labor efficiency. What we see time and time again is labor is our biggest expense, and it's something we want to manage and understand and set KPIs around. What are the best ways to track that? Some things we see and have examples of are just total labor costs. We can look at that as a dollar figure, or we can look at that as a ratio, like we talked about earlier when I looked at the profit and loss. The total labor to your total sales might be a ratio you're keeping track of when you're looking at your financials. We especially like to look at the ratios as we scale, since those, as your sales increase or decrease, the ratio would change proportionally. We might also look at income per labor hour to see how efficient is that new team of butchers? What's that workforce efficiency? Finally, overtime percentage. We want to keep track of that. We want to know when it's time to hire or fire or whatnot. So those are our three groups: financial, production, and labor efficiencies. And with that, we're going to dive into our case studies. We've built these out both in the report and the presentation today to build on each other. So hope they build on themes. They build in size as well, which is helpful. But we're going to be referencing those production, financial, labor KPIs as we talk through each case study. So case number 1. This is just kind of a snapshot, so you can compare and contrast if this is a similar size or understand a little bit about this processor. They're in the Appalachian region. They have processing, value added, and retail as their enterprises. They're working with local producers and small farms. They're USDA inspected. Lots of species being processed, and they're about 15 full-time equivalents as far as labor goes.
And their annual revenue is about 1.5 million.
Great. Okay, so these charts we have for every case study, again, to just really pay a lot of attention to what enterprise we're talking about when we talk about KPIs. So hopefully you recognize these from the study, or you'll recognize kind of what we're trying to show here. So we just call them meat processor plant A for this study. They, similar to the profit and loss we looked at earlier, they have a processing enterprise, which is right here. And then they have a retail class where they're selling finished products. And this is all within their meat processing plant A accounting system and books. But for the KPIs we're looking at for this one, we're just going to look at their processing enterprise. And we're only able to do that because their books have each of those enterprise separated. And so we can narrow in on just the processing side when we're looking at KPIs. I highlight that to say, again, when you talk about benchmarks or comparing processors, this is, in order to compare, they need to be set up in the same way. So these folks were chosen because we know that their books were set up this way. So we're just talking processing, and we're starting with something that might seem like really basic, but for them, it was the first thing they said to us when we talked to them on what's the most important KPI. And they just said, I need to make sure that there's 34 head per week being slaughtered. And that's it. And that's the difference between whether I make money or lose money. And I know that. And I know my scheduler is going to make that happen. So they've assigned someone to that role, and they're looking at it weekly. And for them, the impact of the business decision, like we said, is 34 means that they break even. So this is a screenshot from the report, and we have this same structure for all of our KPIs. But what we want to talk through and highlight today as we go through these is translating that KPI, that deciding what is it, who owns it, how often it's measured, translating it to the financial piece to, again, make that connection to what's profitable about this. Why is this the measure we chose? And what does it show us in our financials? So starting, again, just with number of head slaughtered per week, we can see this range. They told us 34 is their minimum. That's their break-even point. And that's because their revenue is about $3,000, and they have a fixed labor cost for slaughter floor labor at 3,000. So if they get to 34, they're able to cover the labor that week. If they process more than 34, that labor's fixed, it's not going up. So that's the break even point. We can see this gross margin on the slaughter department is just break even if they make it to 34. They also told us that like really it's 40. 40 to us is that's what we know is profitable. If we make it up to 40, we're profitable. So we can see an increased processing or slaughter revenue from processing 40 head per week, same fixed labor cost, and we see gross margin here of $600 a week. That allows them to pay for other overhead expenses each week and know that their business is going to keep going and survive. Their max, they also had the other kind of max end of this was that their cooler can only fit 50 head. So they can't really go over that. If they do hit 50, they know that they're going to be slammed in 2 weeks when they come to processing. So, but they have more profits there. So it's kind of this balance of 40 is profitable for us. That's the sweet spot. We can go up to 50, but our slaughter floor manager knows it's 34 head per week. And this is the KPI. It's just this one number, but it relates to some of these other KPIs we've talked about, gross margin. It also relates to their processing schedule. If they know they meet the slaughter target, then 2 weeks, they know that their processing team is also going to have enough work to do. So it affects other aspects of the business, but they're just measuring this first metric, which I think is key to kind of just be like, it can just be one metric. It has a lot of impacts, but let's just not complicate it. Head per week is easy enough to know what we are doing.
That's awesome. Yeah, and yeah, it is beautifully simple and has a lot of positive downstream consequences, right? If they hit these numbers, so they can measure departmental performance, but then also we know that the core processing is going to have more business if they hit these numbers. When we met with the owner, they showed us how they look at this, and they're reviewing it weekly, but they're looking out 1 to 2 months in advance as well. So they're constantly every week they're reviewing it, but they're looking out an additional 2 months to see what's coming down the pipe. So this is very top of mind for them and for their scheduler and something that they actively manage too.
Yeah, awesome. I think just building right on top of that is their next KPI, which is their pounds processed per day. This is a KPI we hear about all the time. I think it's also worth just saying we're showing these as examples. This isn't prescriptive advice. It's like this is the right KPI to manage to. These are examples. It works for this processor. We'd want you to go through this same process of looking at what your business, asking yourself the right questions, using KPIs you're potentially already measuring, and building out from there versus saying, okay, I now know I need 4,500 pounds per day. But for them, this was the number. 4,500 pounds per day was profitable for their processing enterprise. Which, yeah, was big for them on throughput. It's tied to the number of head that's coming through on the KPI number one. And it's also related to their labor efficiency metrics, and it relates to their labor to sales ratio and their efficiency and their profitability. So again, we're going to go through this process of like, what does it mean when this is met, and what does it look like in the financials? And if it's not met, what would it have looked like? So we'll start with this chart, which is 2022, 2023, and 2024. These first three columns are what actually happened for this processor. We can see their top line revenue, and we can see their pounds processed per day. We're also looking in this at total labor cost as a dollar and a total labor sales ratio. Again, that's the dollar labor cost to the total revenue. So we can see in 2022 that they were at over 4,000 pounds per day. And in 2023, they were closer to 4,600. And as of 2024, they've set this metric. We want to be at 4,500. However, when we look at the numbers for 2024, they are below their KPI. So this is not being met. They know they can meet it because they did it in 2023. And they know that when they are close to that 4,500 pounds per day, their labor to sales ratio is 55%. So that's the number they're looking at in their financials and tying it back to this KPI. When they're at closer to 4,000, that number's above 60.
So sales to labor ratio high, bad. Sales to labor to ratio lower, good, right? Means we have more left over down at the bottom line is the idea. It's kind of a proxy for profit.
Yes. And so what important to note for this processor is that in 2023 they were reaching max. That 4,500 was the level, and they started processing another day per week in 2024. So we can see this average pounds per workday go down. They're still measuring to this 4,500. That's what they want. That's what they want to get back up to. They know it's possible. They know that's the right figure they want to be in for labor to sales. So it's highlighted in this red box is let's look at 2024, and had they gotten up to 4,000 pounds per day, what would that do to their financials? So that's what's happening in this box. So at 4,500 pounds per day, their revenue would have gone up because they would have processed more pounds per day. Their labor would have been the same, and their labor to sales ratio would have been lower, closer to 61. The same exercise is happening here in this next column, but this is if they had met their KPI, which was 4,500. So increased sales, increased labor per day, same labor, lower labor to sales ratio, closer to what they achieved in 2023, which they know is possible because they did it. So this is the impact of not meeting your KPI, is this lower labor to sales ratio would have been possible. A lower labor to sales ratio means more profitability later down in your P&L.
Yep.
Anything?
Quick side note that the issue that we saw from 23 to 24, where they opened up for another day a week, they went from 4 to 5 days, I think. That's something that we see across clients too. Like if you're going to be open for another day, just making sure that you actually have the volume and throughput to make it worth it to open up for that additional day, right? So there can be, I mean, the difference between 23 and 24 going from 55% to 63% is massive. That has massive financial consequences, right? And so getting it back down to that 54%, we're at 4,500 pounds. That's where we want to be.
Awesome. Okay, third KPI for them is yield tracking. And this one came up for them because I think their processor was closed for a certain amount of time. They sent their customers somewhere else. They were doing yield sheets with every carcass, and then their customers came back to them when they were reopened and were kind of demanding it. So they didn't willingly start this, but they love it, and now they use it as a KPI. So for them, for beef, the yield they're looking for is 58 to 62%. And they're tracking this with a yield sheet for every carcass given to every customer, which is a lot of admin. It might be something it sounds like a lot of admin, but they're seeing two main results of this. The first is that their staff members feel empowered. They understand their own metrics and efficiency. Their internal quality control got better, and staff is able to take accountability for each of the carcasses they're working on. The second was that their customers loved it. They were under the assumption that half their animal just disappeared every time, and now they got a yield sheet saying, here's what happened, here's the packages, here's how much trim we took off. They got real data, and the front desk person that she took the owner of this business was saying our front desk person who was getting all these calls from customers was able to pull up a yield sheet and say, okay, here's what happened. I've got this piece of data to share with you. What we ultimately saw in the financial piece was an increase in average order value. So more dollars spent per customer and total sales increase, which was great to see. This is just an example of what they're sharing. So again, they're doing this yield sheet with every customer, every carcass. This is for a half beef. This has total hanging weight, total packaged weight, a percentage yield. For this example that they shared with us, they exceeded their KPI, which was that range, 58 to 62. This is the top 5 cuts, the number of packages, the total weight, percent hanging, all other cuts, the total. We can see this all very clearly, where everything went, directly based off the cut sheet from the customer. And again, the customers like it, the staff like it, and this increased the annual average revenue per customer.
Exactly. And the other piece of that is that their customer count actually went down. So they had fewer customers ordering more from them. Generally, that's kind of what we're looking for. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in a different KPI. But like what I've seen is that some meat processors have 1 million customers and clients, right? It is just a lot to manage that volume of just individual customers, right? The phone calls, the emails, the cut sheets, all that stuff. Every customer is going to be different. If you have fewer customers ordering from you more, generally it's going to mean, you're going to have more reliability around your sales generally, and it's just going to be smoother operations for you. Fewer variables, fewer moving pieces, and fewer customers to get upset, right? So yeah, that was a huge one.
Yeah. All right, that's our first case study. We're going to move on to our second case study. Hopefully some of these concepts build, but we're talking about a different processor for this one. So we've moved to the Midwest. They operate, they have a USDA inspected slaughter processing. They work with local producers. They also own 2 retail butcher shops as separate entities. And we're going to talk about that. They do beef, pork, and lamb, and they have 33 full-time equivalent. Evan, do you have annual revenue top of
Sure
mind?
do. Sure do. Annual revenue just for the processing enterprise on its own is about 3.5 to 4 million annually.
Okay, awesome. So again, we present another graphic to help introduce and remind people of the concepts that, one, everyone sets up their business differently, and you're probably running multiple businesses, and we want to look at those each in their own way in order to think about KPIs. So for this meat processing plant B, same as meat processing plant A, they have a processing enterprise and a value added enterprise, but they also have 2 butcher shops that are totally separate businesses. So they have their own books, um, they have their own books.
Yeah.
And that's
Their
it.
own entities.
And the meat processing plant B is selling to the butcher shops, which we're going to talk about in the third KPI for this one. But it's not an internal sale, it's an external sale. They're separate businesses. So again, presenting this concept. And for the first couple KPIs we talk about, we're going to talk about just the processing side. So for them, they have in their processing, they have 3 departments: slaughter, processing, and value add. And the KPI for them is every week, the department manager is responsible for billing out 3 times their labor cost, which is an interesting way of framing this. I think the owner operator of this plant knew this. Their department managers knew this. They were really clear on this. We might think of this as a labor to sales ratio of 33%, which is how we're going to present it in the financials. But for them, it's this: you're responsible for billing 3 times what your labor costs. And that works for them. It might not work for you. You might think about it another way, but that's what we're starting with. And they're looking at this every week, and someone is really responsible for this. The manager of the department is responsible for reporting the KPI out to the leadership. And if they're not meeting the KPI, they're working on a plan towards improvement, which might be looking at, they might dive into other KPIs from here if they're not meeting this, but this is the first line of defense, if you will. And they know that this is the ratio in each department that gets profitability for the whole enterprise. So we want to look at this in their financials. So this top chart is just like how a department manager might think about this. In this case, they used a composite or average labor rate for their processing. Let's say you're the processing lead. You, on average, pay your team $22 an hour, and you have 15 people working with you that week. Your total labor cost that week is $13,000. You are then expected to report to leadership that you billed out or earned close to 40,000. So that's how this little top chart looks, and that's how each manager is thinking about it weekly. again, what we wanted to tie back to the financials is what does this look like? What's happening with this metric? So this is their real P&L. We're looking at each of their departments are separated out in income and labor lines. So we can see processing, slaughter, value added, income, and the corresponding labor. In this case, this is direct labor. They probably also have an overhead category. It's showing up later down in their P&L, but we're just looking at those departments. And this is the labor to sales ratio as of 2023. So none of these departments were hitting that 33%. That's the 3 times in 2023. What we can see in 2024 is that slaughter department is just meeting this, that for the whole year, they're at 33%. Value added department dropped significantly. They're now at 29%. And processing isn't meeting this KPI, but they're improving. As a ratio, it was 37 and now it's 36. So they're getting better in this category of labor to sales ratio.
So just to pause really quickly on this one, because I think this is one of the more powerful KPI that I think we're looking at here is your direct labor, right? And your direct labor is like the manager of that department, perhaps, and then also like the folks actually working the floor. And so those are the labor costs we're capturing in the labor lines there. And I, you know, I also continuing to work with this client who's anonymous here. I see this with them every time we meet. They're looking at this constantly and managing to it constantly, and it's working too. I mean, that overall direct labor ratio is sitting around 30 to 35% typically. And that, I mean, there's other problems, other opportunities in the business, but that is not one of them, right? That is something that they have very dialed in, and it's because it's very clear what the expectation is, and they have an owner for each one of these departments, and they are actively managing to it. It's really awesome to see.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to move right along to their third KPI, which for them is a gross margin for their butcher shop. So for them, the KPI here is they want a 50% gross margin, which if you're more familiar with markup, that's 100%. They're going to produce bacon at $5 a pound. They're going to sell it for 10. That's a 50% gross margin, 100% markup. And this is key. These butcher shops are new for them. They're in different areas. They want to make sure they're working. And so product gross margin is key for them making this work. So again, these charts are hopefully helpful. In this case, we're just talking about these 2 separate butcher shops. They are purchasing from the value-added enterprise of Meat Processing Plant B. Meat Processing Plant B is also responsible for, one, setting the price, or the cost, I should say, of value-added. And later, we're going to talk about the margin that value-added enterprise might want to see. But in this case, value-added enterprise, I'm going to stick to this example, they're selling bacon at $5 a pound. The butcher shop then has to turn around and sell it for $10 a pound. And we're just looking at this. So for this one, they have 2 butcher shops. They're really tracking the performance. They want to make them work, but they're willing to let them go if they're not working. So this is key for it working. And what we can see in this line, product line, margin line, sorry, this is a little chopped up, is what they actually did. So this first column for Butcher Shop A in 2024, this is what actually happened. They got a 43% gross margin, so they didn't meet the 50%. And that was okay. Their profitability was just break even for Butcher Shop A. Had they met a 50% gross margin, product margin, I should say, the cost is the same. What they pay to value-added enterprise, they are still paying $5 a pound, but they earned more revenue because they actually sold it for 10. What might be at play here are discounts or promos or specials or inventory loss. There's a lot of reasons you might not meet a 50% gross margin. And it might show up as 43 in your P&L. Those are things you want to understand and know. But in order to show what would happen if they had met it, the cost is the same. You're not, what is it, robbing Peter to pay Paul? You're not paying your value-added enterprise any less. You're still paying them $5. You are earning more because you're able to sell it for 10. You're getting that 50% product gross margin. That's flowing through to their actual gross margin and their net operating income. So had they met this 50% product margin, they would have been profitable for this enterprise, for this butcher shop. We also highlight Butcher Shop B in this case because Butcher Shop B is not going so well. And Butcher Shop B's gross margin in 2024 was 36. So I'm not sure what the more detail is there, but they're not meeting this 50% gross margin and they're losing money. And they're not totally willing to dump a lot of money into this forever. So they really, really want to keep their eyes on this and manage to this 50% gross margin. If they had met it in 2024, they would have seen profitability at the bottom line. But maybe it's not in the right market. Maybe there's too many discounts. Maybe there's inventory. Maybe the coolers went out. I don't know. There's a
Yep.
lot of reasons why you don't meet it.
So I can tell you why Butcher Shop B was not performing as well is because Butcher Shop B was doing wholesale accounts and Butcher Shop A was not. That was it. And
Yeah.
one of the decisions we made was to cut wholesale, which was hard to do. It was like a hard decision to make, but we ultimately decided to do that. We've done it. And now gross margin has increased and now it is break even at the bottom line, at least. Right. So those are the sort of decisions that can come out of tracking this stuff. Those are the sorts of decisions we want to ultimately drive to. Right. It's not always as big of a decision as that might be. Sometimes it's tweaky, but that was a big decision. It came directly out of this key performance indicator.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to cruise along to our third case study. We're going to build on a lot of concepts that we've already talked about, so I hope we can all follow along. This processor's in the Midwest. They do USDA processing, value-added, wholesale. They have a lot of enterprises, which we'll talk through. Their customer has a really strong anchor client, which we'll talk through. They do USDA inspected slaughter. They're doing pork, beef, and lamb, and they have 54 full-time equivalent. Annual revenue.
Annual revenue processing only, like core processing is 3.5 million. Total revenue for the entire business across all the enterprises is about 6.3 million annually.
Awesome. Okay, so another enterprise overview chart. Meat processing plant C has 3 enterprises. They do processing, they do further processing, and then they have a selling enterprise, which is selling wholesale and finished meat sales. One of the people that the selling enterprise sells to is a separate business, which is a retail store associated with meat processing plant C, but it's a totally separate business. It has its own books. Okay, so the first KPI for the first place we're going to talk about is this processing piece. So for them, the first one is that they have 350 processing slots every week. So very similar to the 34 head slaughtered per week for case study number 1, but this is processing, but it's slot utilization. They need to fill 350 slots. They have someone in charge of that. It's their processing manager, and they're looking at this every week. Similar to what Evan said, they're monitoring it weekly, but they're also looking months out. They want to make sure that they have 350 processing slots a week. That keeps everyone busy and working. Ideally, they have a wait list, but right now it's not so much. They're still working to ensure a full pipeline. And again, this relates to whether value added and wholesale sales also is profitable. So this is just one metric, but it affects a lot of aspects of their business. And KPI 1 and 2 are kind of aligned for this business. So first up is 350, and this is just a screenshot of their schedule that they're working with, which is that they do a lot of pigs and some beef. And really it's 80 to 90 a day, Monday through Thursday, and then they want 15 head of beef a week. What's key about them and leads right into KPI number 2 is that they have an anchor client who's set and confirmed these 2 days per week. They are reliable, they have a great partnership. So these 2 days are filled. The other customers have to fill the rest of this schedule every week. And a big thing for them to manage for this is like if they're not busy, they're not going to work all 5 days. They might move this beef to Thursday. They might clean on Thursday instead of processing. So they're also in this in between. If they don't meet 350, they're gonna only work 4 days and adjust their schedule so that they can really, again, manage their labor because they know it's crucial. They can't only process 30 pigs on Thursday and pay everyone. So I don't have a chart for how that shows up in their financials, but that's how they're thinking about it. And for this customer or for this client, um,
Really quick, can we go
yeah,
back to that really quick?
yeah,
So, yeah, uh, this is absolutely critical to everything else working in the organ. And so really what this translates to is just revenue for the entire business, right? Across processing, further processing, wholesale, all of the enterprises are reliant on this. For that reason, um, the ownership of this metric sits with the owner. It might be scheduled out by a scheduler or whatever it might be, but the owner is the one who's driving the business, who's doing the business development, that's getting those anchor clients, that is making sure they're happy. That's not always the case, but in this particular case, that is what's happening. The owner is really driving this because everything else depends on it. So,
that's a good
not a
point.
lot here, like visually, but this is quite important for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, it goes right into this next KPI for them, which was even though they love this anchor client and it fills up 2 days per week of their processing, they also are monitoring how much of their revenue comes from this anchor client for their own liability. They don't want to be in a situation where this anchor client disappears and they have more than 50% of their business to fill. So for them, this is we want to keep our anchor client less than 50% of our total sales. And we're going to look at that monthly when we do our financial review and keep track on that. So, yeah, exactly as Evan said, the owner is really into this customer, is managing their customers, making sure that relationship's right, adjusting pricing or capacity as necessary to meet their demands. Because one of the things you'll see with their customer mix is I don't know, 75 plus percent of their total sales is just five customers. So if one of them disappears, they have a big slot to fill. So again, they're really into that maintaining customer relationship and making sure they're following what their customers are needing. So this is their anchor client, customer A. They're spending 2.6 million a year with them. And we're seeing in 2023, we saw that really close to 50. And that's why this became up as a KPI. 2024, we're monitoring, it's down closer to 47. And that's because they brought in some, customer 5E here was at 12. And then through the relationship that was really fostered, they increased this total sales from 0 to 4% of their total sales, which brought down this um, total sales for their anchor client. So this is huge for them, is monitoring this 350 slots per week, and then sales by customer and relationship management. Anything else to add?
I don't think so. I think, yeah, I mean, we don't want to have two customers, for our entire business, but we also don't want a million. We want somewhere in between. I think a good, as like a general rule of thumb, perhaps, like your top 10 customers should be less than 50% of your total revenue. Just kind of thumb in the air, right? Um, Something to go off of. Also, too, I mean, there's real benefits, right, of having some of these anchor clients for all sorts of reasons, operationally and such. But, those partnerships are super valuable too. I mean, if you're doing expansion, it's not unheard of for customers to invest in your expansion. It can become a source of capital for you, right? Like there's all sorts of reasons to have really strong partnerships with those top 5 to 10 customers in your business. And it's not just sales, it's a bunch of other stuff in your business too.
Awesome. All right. This third KPI for them builds on a lot of concepts we've talked about. But for them, it's that their selling enterprise or their finished meat sales have a 10% gross margin. And they're doing this by batch costing. So every time they process a batch of animals for a customer, they're doing a report on batch costing, which is what we're going to talk about. They do this with every batch per customer so that they really are keeping their eyes on this. And this, again, I talked about this before. This talks about like They make pricing decisions based on this product mix, the efficiencies of their processing and value-added processing. So it plays into a lot of other aspects of their business, but they have one thing that they're looking at and measuring too. It's also been a big thing for like understanding their business and how it's working and what isn't working and when they need to raise their prices, basically. So again, screenshot here of this case study. We're talking about this enterprise needing to make a margin. So they need to produce a cut and then put a 10% margin on it before they sell it at their wholesale price to the retail store or to any other customer. So it allows profitability for this whole meat processing plant C because selling isn't losing money. Selling needs to make 10% at the gross margin level. A third of processing is hopefully making money. Processing is making money. If all that's happening, we're good. We don't want to see one enterprise kind of suck all the resources. And we want to make management decisions if we are seeing that. So they're doing a batch costing report, like I said, per batch, and they're looking at the end result of a 10% gross margin for their wholesale finished meat sales. So this up top walks through the costs associated with this batch. So we have the cost of the animals and the processing cost per pound. That's what they're paying the processing enterprise. So we know based on those two things the total cost of this batch. And we're going to work backwards from there to get our total cost per pound once we do a yield sheet per batch. So for this, it's trim, it's boneless picnic pork and other cuts. So this is just a highlight of what they're making for this customer, and they know what their finished weight was, what their percent yield was, and based on this total cost, they're getting a total cost per pound per product and backing into a cost per pound per product.
Yeah. What really in this example, the cost per pound per cut doesn't matter. What matters is the total cost for the batch, and then what's the total revenue for that batch too. So I think it's easier, probably better
Yeah.
to just kind of look at the totals.
Yeah.
And right, and what are our costs? Our costs again are the cost of the animal and the cost of the processing services. And if you don't split out your enterprises, you're not going to capture your cost of processing. Very likely you won't, right? Because it's all going to be muddled up and mixed up. That's a core reason why we split this out. So we can actually understand our margins on the finished product, and we're charging ourselves for that processing cost, just like any other customer would, right?
Right. Yeah. So high level numbers here. Total batch cost, we understand that from processing and animal. And then we know that this retail enterprise has a certain price. So we know the total batch revenue based on what we produced. In this case, we have a profit and a 14% margin for this batch example. And that's the KPI right there. We want to be over 10. They did it for this example. And yeah, there's a lot more detail of how in the study itself of how that's all done in that batch costing sheet. What this ties back to is their financials. So for 2024, for their selling class, we can see their total sales and their total COGS and their gross profit and their gross margin of 3%. So for all of last year, they didn't meet this 10% margin, and that flowed through. They lost money in this enterprise, and their net margin was negative 2%. So this is what actually happened. So even though that example, they were at 14%, sometimes they're not, and that ranges by batch. If they had met this 10%, their COGS, again, would stay the same, but they would have made more money because they would have sold at a different price. They would have had a different pricing structure or sold more to the more profitable channel or whatever it would have been to get a 10% gross margin. Again, that flows through to expenses are the same, but now there's more net income and net margin. So profitability at the end of this, had they met it.
Yep. And again, I think that, not all of these KPI are going to be related to every business, right? And so you notice when we're talking about retail gross margins, like we did earlier, it was like a 50% margin. Holy smokes, that's a lot higher than 10%, right? With these guys, they're really focused on wholesale here. And so that margin is going to be a lot thinner because we're just getting a lower price per pound typically, because we're selling in volume, right? And you look at the overhead expenses associated. Can you go back to the what we were just looking at?
Yeah.
The overhead expenses associated with this are very minimal compared to the revenue, right? This is essentially like a clearing enterprise. Meat comes in, meat goes out as quick as possible, right? We just want to get it out the door. That's why we can absorb kind of a 10% margin here. And usually, when we're talking about gross margin on finished products, there's two sides of it. There's the costs, and then there's the price we're selling it for. So if you're not hitting your margin, those are the two things you look at. Can we bring in livestock for a lower price, right? That is a massive issue for finished meat sales right now. Is the cost of livestock, as you all probably know, is through the roof, and it doesn't seem like it's going to come down next year either. And it's a big problem. So is there any way that we can get our animals in for a lower price, right? If we try to get a lower price on our processing costs, then we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, aren't we? We're just going to pay less to the other business that we own. We don't want to do that. So we're not going to touch that. So it's either the livestock cost needs to adjust or we need to adjust our revenue. There's two ways to do that, really. There's a yield sheet. So, right, like we can cut different types of cuts from the animal that might have a better better price associated with it. We can play with what is our cut sheet when we're doing this. That's one thing. The other thing is just price increase. That's kind of like the area of last resort. We go to price increases when we've tried everything else because we want to treat our customers as well as possible. We want to keep them around, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, if you can't get your margin to budge and you've tried everything you can on cost, you've tried everything you can on your cut sheet, you have to look at your prices, right? You have to increase your prices. So again, some like really important decisions can come out of this stuff, right? Okay. Developing your own KPIs, right? So, it's just what are those key questions that you really need to know about your business, right? And what data and some of the examples, all these examples we brought up here are just questions that these clients really want to know. These business owners really want to know about their business. Am I making money on my wholesale? Are my retail enterprises actually making money? Are our yields appropriate and are we treating our customers properly with quality and all that stuff? These are all questions that they were wanting to answer. And so they developed KPI around them and tied them to the financials to make sure that they're profitable. What data do you already have on hand? You probably have data, right? You got production records, you got yield records, perhaps, you got financial records, you got labor records. So I know we're talking a lot about like splitting out enterprises and such, right? That can be a chore to do, right? That can take time and planning and all that stuff. Just start with what you have. It's not going to be perfect to start. That's okay. Try stuff, right? Try something. Maybe it's just revenue, or maybe it's just like total labor against your revenue, your labor to sales ratio, right? And that could have all sorts of enterprises in there, whatever it might be. Start somewhere. So you're establishing a baseline, and then you can just see over time, is that labor to sales ratio going up or down? As long as you're consistent about it, we should be able to see if things are getting better or things are getting worse. Is labor the problem or is it your supplies, right? Start simple, start where you can. And then, those five kind of key questions for each KPI. What is it? How do you measure it? How frequently? Who owns it? What decisions are we going to make out of this? You can do that for every KPI that you develop. And then five, just kind of like overarching guidelines for KPI, right? Simple. Don't track too many. I think somewhere, if you're tracking 15, that's probably too many. If you're tracking 0 or 1, that's not enough. Something like 5 or so, 6, something like that is probably going to be like your really key KPI. If we don't hit these, this doesn't work, right? Keep it simple. Do it, be consistent about it, and do it on the cadence that you establish. If it's daily, if it's weekly, if it's monthly, just do it, right? Post it. There's some KPI that you're going to develop that are relevant to your staff too, right? Maybe it's not just your directors or just your managers, it's the direct staff too, right? For instance, one of my clients, they do a lot of, we do pounds hang weight process per working hour, which is kind of a mouthful, but that's what it is. And that is posted every week for all staff to see, right? And they can see their relative performance week to week on that. And they know also, too, that's incentivized. So if they hit a certain pounds per hour, they get paid more when they hit it. So not only is it a KPI that the ownership cares about, also now all their direct staff really care about it too, because they're going to make more money if they hit it, right? Good, bad. We have to compare it to something to know if it's good or not good, right? Looking at a number alone doesn't tell you something. You have to compare it to something else. So if you have a budget, right, you can measure it against your budget. If you don't have a budget, you measure it against last year or last month or yesterday or whatever it is. Just measure it against something. Change it. If it's not working, change it, right? So do your best with it, be consistent with it, do it on that cadence, post it, determine if it's good or bad. But if you're not making better decisions out of it, or you can't really tell if it's good or bad based on what you're doing, just change it and then try it again, right? This is an iterative process. This is something that we iterate with our clients all the time. These things change. Your business changes, right? So your KPI should also change with the business as well. All right. Wow.
We did it.
I can't believe it. Great.
Nice job, you guys. Plenty of time now for questions. A few that have come in the chat have already been answered. So I'm just opening up the floor now to new questions. Folks can pop it in the chat, or I think you can unmute yourself as well to ask. So it's all yours. All right, let's see what we got. Mark asks, what about the dressing percentage rate? I'm assuming you're talking about the yield, right?
So can you hear me well?
Yep. Yeah, go for it.
So you talk about the cut yield for the package good, finished good that is coming out of the cutting table and things like that. But when you are vertically integrated, procurement so important, and the quality of the animal that you get has a huge impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
So big impact on profit margin is not only cut yield for what's coming out of the cutting table, but the dress rate in the slaughtering operation.
Mm.
So you're saying like live weight to hang weight, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why it's still, even if you pay on hanging weight, why is it important to look and track dress rate?
I would say absolutely that is a very important metric to measure. It's not something that came up specifically in these case studies with these particular processors. Doesn't mean that they're not doing it, right? Or that it's not important. But yeah, absolutely. A lot of folks are charging on the hang weight. So your live to hang weight is going to be super critical, not only for your processing customers, but also if you're doing retail too. No doubt that's super important.
Yeah, because you can have, let's say, 70% cut yield. That's amazing. Okay. But if you have dress rate of 55% instead of 64%, right there, it's 900 basis points less in profit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Mark. Again,
Yeah,
like Evan said, each processor has kind of come up with their key performance indicators, but it does not mean at all that you can't come up with your own that make more sense for your business. So thank you for addressing that. I'm going to move on to the next question. Henry asked, are the case studies tracking these KPIs in Excel or other platforms? Good question.
That's a great question. Grace, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. And in my experience, most are, it's a combination between just their accounting system, right? But really, we're crunching all that stuff in spreadsheets, unfortunately. It does take some. You have to stay on top of it. You got to make sure the data is getting in there. And oftentimes it's being put in there by hand. So there's errors that can happen too. But I have seen mostly Excel and spreadsheets for it. Grace, have you seen anything else?
I think there's some platform kind of evolving that we got a presentation about that I think might take some of that yield cut piece of it. But yeah, for these folks, I see spreadsheet management, posted, whiteboard, that kind of stuff. As they scale, like the last processor uses kind of a weekly reporting system, and then that's graphed into a chart to look at some of those pounds processed per hour metrics. But yeah, definitely see it in spreadsheets.
Mhm. Yeah, and some processors have yield tracking software programs that are integrated throughout their whole plants. All right, good question. Diane is asking, do you have any case studies that are focused on poultry? I think in our mastermind group, that first group of mastermind students, I think there was 16 plants, and I think maybe one of them was doing poultry. But none of the three that we did these in-depth interviews were poultry focused. Grace, Evan, do you have any poultry processors you're working with?
We do have a couple that we're working with right now, but we don't have case studies published on them. We may do one of those, but that would probably be in the next 6 months or so, something like that.
Mhm.
Traditionally, we have worked with more like red meat clients in the past, so that is where most of our experience lies.
Mhm.
I'm gonna plop in here too into the chat. We so the case studies are on the NMPAN website that we just reviewed today. And yeah, y'all should download it, take a look at it, all that stuff. I'm gonna plop in a different one too from Good Roots that we published on delicacy meats, which is one of our clients. It's not poultry, but it is just another example of a case study.
Yeah, also this QR code has the slides and the presentation as well. If you take a picture of that and pop that open.
Awesome. Thank
And
you.
I think it has links for Grace and I if you want to book 30 minutes of our time for free to talk about your business or the weather or whatever you want, you can book time with us, and we'd love to meet with y'all one-on-one and see if there are areas that we can help out in. We'd love to explore it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and although this is not a sales pitch for Good Roots, the three case studies we shared, they work very closely with those folks and did a tremendous amount of work helping them clean up their books so that they could actually start tracking this information. So if you are in need of that, separating out your enterprises or cleaning up your books, they're an excellent resource for that. Randy asks, can you comment on observation of profitability to margin across the different species? How often do you find operations specializing in one species versus multiple? Is same profit margin across species a frequent KPI? I have some thoughts on that, but why don't you guys start if you have anything to say?
I'll start with just a couple anecdotes. We don't have a ton of like deep dive data on this stuff, and Rebecca, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. We used to track our processing like margins by species. What we found it was kind of hard to do on an ongoing basis. It was like a lot of administrative accounting work in order to do that, and the level of visibility we got wasn't great. So then we ended up collapsing it down to just total processing, total COGS associated with it. Um, I will say, I do have a client right now that is making the leap from processing pork and beef to just processing pork. And there's financial reasons for that, but really it's operational reasons. It's just a heck of a lot easier to just focus on that particular species. And they have a pipeline of customers that are waiting for more pork. And so it just makes a lot of sense. Um, and we do expect that to have a positive financial impact on the business. And that's what we've modeled, but we haven't actually seen it yet. So we don't know what the actuals look like yet. But Rebecca?
Yeah, I mean, we work with thousands of processors across the country, and I will say in general, and I don't have data on this, but just stories, every processor that I know that has simplified down to one species for operational reasons or the cost of the animals that they have access to, that they always improve their profitability upon simplification. So that generally is true across the board. Obviously, pigs have the best yield percentage. We know that from lots of data. And so if you're buying whole animals and trying to make money off those animals, you can make the most margin on pigs. And then beef is exorbitant right now. So some folks are dropping beef or at least reducing their beef processing, but it's so location specific too. You know, if you're across the street from a feedlot or, you know, across the street from pig barns, a lot of it is geography. And I find that a lot of processors will track profitability on species, you know, maybe by the batch or a couple times a year to just see, you know, what is this looking like for our business? But they don't do it on a regular basis because kind of once they establish it, they know it. It seems to me a lot of processors drop lamb once they realize how labor intensive they are and how little money they can make on it. So that's just some anecdote. Stephen is loving the webinar, so thank you so much. And please take the time to read the actual 38-page paper. We tried to distill it down into an hour and a half, but there's a lot of really good stuff in the paper that we linked at the beginning. Let's see, Patrick, I think you've touched on this in a lot of your case studies, but what are the universal KPIs that are going to be relevant for all processors?
Super good question. I mean, my 2 cents on this would be for most meat processors, there's going to be something around revenue, and that's on scheduling and slot utilization, like we were talking about earlier. And unless you have like a very capable sales manager or business development person or a very capable scheduler who gets sales and understands that sales is not order taking, but it's like getting sales, right? Like there's a difference between those two things. And oftentimes the owner is in the best position to really establish those strong connections at the top end of the funnel. I think you need to have something around scheduling and sales, right? Number of clients, something like that, right? That's number one. Number two, the labor portion of this. I think the labor to sales ratio is applicable to every business, not just meat processors, like literally every business, right? So labor to sales ratio in some sense. I think the best way to look at labor is your direct versus overhead labor. And the ratio of those two things are different. Your direct labor should be more variable. It should go up and down with sales. Your overhead labor will not go up and down with sales, right? So we want to look at those two things separately and be like, are we too heavy on our management and director labor and administrative labor, or are we too heavy on our direct labor, or is our direct labor actually not variable? Like our sales dropped, but our labor didn't go down. Like what's the deal there, right? So that would be number two, is something around labor to sales. Number three is if you are selling finished product, gross margin. You need to be a gross margin hawk, right? Like what is happening with our gross margin every month on finished product is super critical for profitability, particularly with the high cost of livestock right now. Grace, did I miss anything? Or do you have anything to add there?
I agree.
Awesome. Let's see what else we got. Recording will be available on the NPAN website and our YouTube channel. And Good Roots might post it to their website as well.
I'm sure we will.
Let's see. Brianna says another hands up for case studies on poultry. Our plant is making decisions for scheduling, and it would be so helpful. I'm kind of wondering, I don't know, thinking out loud here. I don't really think that poultry is going to be a lot different. I mean, you're going to have your processing side. So say you're a fee-for-service poultry processor and you work with 24 farmers. You've got your processing enterprise. Perhaps you have a value-added enterprise, and maybe you have a retail storefront or a selling enterprise that's selling wholesale. And so you would have KPIs around scheduling and volume of animals slaughtered and pounds processed for your value added. You would have all your ingredients costs and your cost of goods. And then for your selling, you would be trying to hit those gross margin percentages, labor to sales. I mean, I don't really see anything being different. What do you guys think?
I agree with that generally. And we're working with an established poultry processor right now, and we're working with a startup poultry processor too, that actually just did construction and built it out and all that stuff. And it's the same KPI that Rebecca just went over.
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
Yeah. and then there's unique KPIs that you can come up with for your own facility. I mean, maybe other costs like utility costs might be particularly high for you. So maybe you want to look at some more facility related metrics. What else am I thinking? Yeah, I can't really think of anything else, but feel free to pop in the chat or even unmute yourself if that answer wasn't sufficient for you. Anything else? Let's see. Randy asks, recommend initial steps or resources for processors who need training on how to define and then track COGS.
Yeah, I'd say step one is getting to NPAN's mastermind program around processing. Does a great job, like super in-depth, thorough, kind of customized training over a long period of time. I don't know if you want to talk more about that, Rebecca, but I think that's a fantastic opportunity. I think leaning on folks like NPAN and their one-on-one assistance that they do, as well as Good Roots and other technical assistance providers out there. There's a lot of stuff you can find online too. And I can't point you to one spot in particular, but I would just research, like what typically goes in cost of goods sold for this or that enterprise. You should be able to find some stuff. But, at the end of the day, your cost of goods sold need to be the defining characteristic of it is if I sell one, do I buy one? Right? So if I sell something, am I going to have to buy something? And like packaging is a really easy example, right? I'm going to sell some meat. I got to pay for the packaging, right? That direct labor, that's why we split out that direct labor. If we're going to sell something, we have to process that meat. And so we need the folks on the floor to actually do that. So we are going to pay for that, right? But insurance, for instance, that has nothing to do with sales. We're going to pay insurance no matter what, and it's going to be the same amount. We're going to pay it every month or every year, whatever. So, the last thing I'll say on that is probably the least amount of investment that happens with businesses generally is in their bookkeeper. Get a good bookkeeper from day one. And I'm not saying like hire Good Roots, like literally just in your community, down the street, like whatever, right? Like find a good bookkeeper and pay them what they need to manage your books properly. Because you find a good bookkeeper, you find a good CPA, they should be able to get you set up if they know what they're doing.
Yes, there is a big difference though between a bookkeeper and interpreting the financial data. So you can get loads of great data from your bookkeeper, but it's what you do with that data that really matters. And so that's where you might need to bring in Good Roots or a CPA or somebody else to really help you interpret it. Any last questions? I did post a link to the Meat Processor Academy. So just for clarification, the Meat Processor Academy is a self-paced online course for beginning or beginning-ish meat processors within their first couple years. We have at least 2 or 3 lessons taught by Good Roots staff on developing your chart of accounts, separating out your enterprise classes, talking about cost of goods sold. It's self-paced. Anyone can take that at any time. It's got about 24 hours of content. And then every other year, we do a mastermind program, which is an in-depth 12-month-long cohort program, small cohort program, where we meet for several hours every month and we talk about each other's businesses and we bring in experts and coaches. And that one is not for everybody. That is for experienced processors, not beginners. And there's a large investment of time and money into that program, but it's led to fantastic results for the processors who have gone through it. So we're in the middle of a cohort right now, so we will not open that program up again until 27 because we do it every other year. But for anyone right now, they can take the Meat Processor Academy and learn a lot of this stuff. So I think that's about it. We will post the recording within a couple of days. And the case study, I post a link to it, but it's on our website. We hope that you'll take a deep dive into it after this webinar because this was really just scratching the surface. but now equipped with this information, you'll really be able to understand that more in-depth paper a lot better. Evan and Grace, you've done so much tremendous work on this, and I've learned so much. So thank you for your time and help on this.
And vice versa. Thank you for all your support on this, Rebecca. And thanks everybody for attending. And yeah, don't hesitate to reach out.
All right. Thank you.